Are you new to a supervisory or management role? Or are you about to enter a supervisory or management role in your organization? Or perhaps you've been in one of these roles for some period of time, but have never had an opportunity to receive any formal guidance or training in the area of leadership development. In today's segment, we're going to look at aspiring leaders. Coming up next. Hi everyone, Dennis Gilbert. Leadership is a broadly used word. In today's segment, we're going to consider a lot of qualities and characteristics that are important to lead in your workplace role. One of the first areas that I'd like to take a moment to discuss is that there are often three words closely associated with leading within an organization. They are supervisor or supervision, manager or management, and then of course the word leadership. In many cases, people often believe that the word leadership represents only those top level positions in the organization. They may be positions such as senior director or vice president or president and CEO. Of course, in a formal sense, these probably do represent the ultimate leadership positions within an organization. But great leadership is needed everywhere throughout the organization. And even in those roles where we have people who do not have any direct reports, but they still represent a decision-making function. They may lead committees or other teams. And so great leaders are really needed everywhere within the organization. If we were to look up the meaning of the words supervision, management, or leadership, of course, we would find some differences. In the scope of this segment, I would like you to consider that we may use those words somewhat interchangeably. We may use the words supervisor, manager, or leader, and in this reference, it's all really related to the same thing, the idea or the topic of leading within your organization. So let's dig a little bit deeper and discover some of the characteristics and values that are associated with leadership in organizations today. Have you considered what qualities are important for you to lead? Have you evaluated your strengths and weaknesses as it relates to your leadership role? Let's take a look at a few words that may represent some characteristics or qualities of high-performance leaders. Vision, character, passion, honesty, resilience, strength, persistence, integrity, and experience. These words represent just a few of many characteristics that are important for quality leadership in today's workplace. Often when we think about our strengths and weaknesses, we sometimes forget that there are many broad characteristics of how people measure or view us in our workplace role. One thing that's very important about being in a leadership role is that often it's considered that all eyes are on you. People may be more observing of your behavior than what you truly realize. And in fact, some of these strengths and weaknesses will emerge subconsciously without your really knowing that it's taking place or happening. I often ask people to consider, what do you want people to remember you by, or how do you want people to remember you after you've left your current role? Of course, many people, once obtaining an official leadership role or a leadership capacity, believe that they'll be in that position for a very long period of time. And that's great if they're very committed to their organization and their organization grows and develops, and They are equally meeting each other's needs. It's fantastic to spend a career with a given organization. But in today's workplace, many times our roles shift or change, even contained within the same organization. So I'll sometimes ask, how do you want people to remember you after you've left your current role? And sometimes I may get a response of, I don't really care how people remember me. I'm not here to win a popularity contest. Well, of course, it may be true or real that you are not there to win a popularity contest, but having good spirit of teamwork and team development and having very solid workplace relationships will be critical for your leadership success. So you want people to hopefully have a good memory of you, have the thought that no matter what, he or she is there to back me up. I know I can trust this person. I know they have high integrity. I know when the going gets tough, they're the kind of person that's going to be resilient and stick it out through the thick and the thin. These are just a few identifiers or a few qualities that may be important for building a strong leadership presence in your organization. So let's talk about some leadership myths. The first myth that I'd like to discuss is the idea that good leadership is based on manipulation and coercion. Of course, that may seem almost funny when we hear it, and we certainly, most of us, would quickly identify that that is not a good practice. If we went way back into the Industrial Revolution, perhaps there was a little bit more manipulation and coercion back in those days. But to successfully lead in today's environment, the idea of manipulating or coercing employees into doing job tasks or duties certainly is not a good idea. The second myth that I'd like to take a moment to reference or discuss is the idea that the organization chart determines who the leaders are. Of course, we know the organization chart to start at the top with the president or CEO, and as it moves down to vice presidents, maybe senior directors or directors, managers, supervisors, all the way down to the front line employees. We often think that in the organization that the only true leaders are those formal positions. But in fact, this is not the case. Many people would quickly recognize that they may have known someone who is in a very high-ranking formal position that perhaps doesn't demonstrate great leadership qualities. And likewise, they've also known some people that are in very low-ranking positions, perhaps without any direct reports, who exhibit exceptional leadership qualities. So while the organization chart may determine who the formal leaders are, it certainly doesn't determine who has leadership qualities or who demonstrates the ability to be a great leader. The third myth that I want to talk about is the myth or the idea that all leaders are exceptionally charismatic. Of course, there have been many books written on the topic of leadership, and some of them have addressed this idea of being a charismatic leader. Some of the findings in some of my studies, the books that I've read, indicate that while charisma is a strong quality, and it's good to be able to interface at all levels and show that charisma and be happy and be a good people person. Of course, that's very valuable. But in fact, some studies have indicated that leaders that are able to take an organization from being a very good organization to being a great organization are not necessarily all that charismatic. Of course, it may not hurt. It's always a decent quality or a good quality to have. But if anyone is fearful that they don't believe that they are that charismatic, research has indicated that not all great leaders are exceptionally charismatic. The fourth myth that I want to take a moment to mention is that the great leaders are the most educated. Of course, Education is very valuable, and even watching this segment hopefully is an educational experience. But in the workplace, I believe that it is a combination of both education and experience that makes the true leaders or the greatest leaders. It is very helpful for us to obtain more and more education on some subject matter that we're interested in or something that's related to our job performance. But once we have some of that knowledge, whether it comes from reading or watching videos or training material or sitting through lectures or some kind of professional development activities or even coaching or mentoring, all of those things are part of our education. And then we have to be able to apply those things and those real world experiences in our workplace. So those are 4 really great myths. And sometimes I'll ask workshop participants, what other myths haven't I mentioned? And one that frequently comes up is the myth or the idea that great leaders are born, not made. So I believe that that also truly represents a myth, and that we can grow and develop into leadership roles. We're not necessarily born with the qualities of whether we will or will not be a great leader. We have to grow and develop as people in order to achieve that high performance in our job role. Understanding your organization and business is critical for success. It's critical for work prioritization, for outputs, and even for innovation. Sadly, it is generally unknown. What I'm referring to here is the organization's mission statement. And sometimes in workshops, I'll ask participants, does anyone here know the organization's mission statement? And of course, I wouldn't expect someone to necessarily be able to recite that mission statement word for word, but often it's great if they can pull together a few pieces of what represents that organization's mission statement. When you're in a leadership role, it's critical that you do understand very completely, thoroughly, what that organization's mission is. And it may be important for you to understand how your work group or department relates or ties into that mission. Of course, of equal importance is the idea that your direct reports, if you have some, are also responsible, are also energized and encouraged in their role by knowing and understanding that mission statement. This simple idea is one that I often find is lacking or missing in the organization. And the idea of understanding at all levels the purpose of that organization helps create an environment that is passionate about the work or services or goods that that organization produces. So we can never underestimate the value of knowing what is the purpose of this business, what is the purpose of this department or team, and how does that all tie into creating the success of the business or organization. Understanding more about leadership requires most individuals to understand or discover more about themselves. I want to reference 3 specific areas or categories of leadership that are critical for leadership success. The first one is integration. How do you integrate effectively with your team, your organization, and any peer-to-peer interactions or those direct report interactions? The second is the ability to work with others. We'll have a lot of challenges in our leadership roles, and we have to be able to effectively build solid workplace relationships and work well with others. The third point, or the third area or category, is the area of self-alignment. And this requires that you have a deeper understanding of you and how you can best manage all of these aspects of leadership to be recognized as a true high-performance leader in your organization. So let's take a closer look at these three areas. Integration relates to four more specific areas. The first area is the area of customer orientation. So when we're in our leadership roles, we have to be sure that we understand who the customer is and how does the organization meet or exceed those customer expectations. Of course, they also have to recognize the idea of both internal and external customer orientation. The second factor, or the second area under integration, is the area of business acumen. And often when I say business acumen, I get some slightly confused looks, and it is a little confusing sometimes to know or understand exactly what is meant by business acumen. Of course, we could look up business acumen in a dictionary and understand more about what each of these words means. But for our purposes, what I would like to consider is that business acumen represents that business common sense. What really drives profitability in that organization? What are areas that may experience waste or be problematic? How is that organization truly profitable or successful? And how do we measure those aspects of the organization? Of course, not every leader needs to have the vision or the access to the information at the same level as the CEO or maybe the chief financial officer, but they should have some rough idea of what drives profitability in this organization and how they can help that organization truly be more successful. The third area relates to project leadership. And some organizations may even have positions that are known as project leaders. But many organizations do not have a formal position with this title, but they have many people who manage projects. And in order to be really effective and efficient in your leadership role, you have to be able to manage projects. And sometimes this may be something as small or simple as a work order or something that's going to take an hour or two of a given day to process through. In other cases, managing a project may be something that lasts days, weeks, months, or years. And the idea of being able to evaluate and manage timelines, milestones, and integrate all of those things are important for you in your leadership role. The fourth and final piece of this is what we often refer to simply as managing change. And managing change is critical for you to be an effective leader. Most organizations are experiencing change. There may be different forces driving those changes, but they're experiencing a lot of change. Most organizations that are successful today embrace the idea of constant change, and they recognize that based on today's economic conditions, in order to maintain the highest level of performance, they have to be great at managing change. And so part of the integration process is to be able to work with that team and effectively lead various change efforts. The second of three areas that I wanted to discuss is the idea of working well with others. And this area or category also has four distinct subcategories that are critical for leadership success. The first one is, what level of relationship skills do you have? How do you build effective relationships in your workplace? I mentioned earlier in this segment that sometimes people believe that having a strong leadership following is not essential to truly manage or lead people. And I strongly disagree. I believe that having fantastic person-to-person, coworker-to-coworker, boss to direct report, and even direct report to boss kinds of relationships are truly critical for your success. The second area under this category is the area of communication. And of course, that is a big, broad area and one that we could spend much time exploring more deeply. But simply put, we have to be effective communicators. We have to be able to communicate with a team and with other people, other organizations, other businesses, vendors, partners, whatever the case is. Effective communication is absolutely essential and critical for your success. The third area is the idea of coaching or mentoring. In order to work well with others and to be a great leader, we have to be able to help people who are coming on board, who are entering our team, or even those people that are a little more seasoned, who have been on the team for some period of time, perhaps need some coaching or mentoring. And of course, as a great leader, you're also serving as a good role model to these employees that are part of your team or that you interface with. The fourth element of this is the idea of how do you help the team actualize the vision? And that's another one of those words or phrases that sometimes sparks some curiosity or interest. Actualizing the vision. And this is critical for working with others to be an effective leader. And actualizing the vision really represents the idea that you are able to help the team, your coworkers, your peers, people of all levels of the organization recognize how to truly achieve the goals of that organization or that department or that work group. And sometimes people are perplexed by the seemingly broad goals or the stretch goals, the goals that are hard to obtain. And they may hear or look at the goals and they may say, there is no way possible that we'll ever achieve that. But in reality, true leaders help that business or help those employee teams discover how that goal is actually developing and how after some period of time, whether it's a check-in a few days into the goal period, a few months, a few weeks, whatever the case may be, how they're actually making progress or making strides towards accomplishing that ultimate vision. And this is a skill that we sometimes take for granted, but it's critical when you're leading teams that you're able to help them actually see that the vision of the organization is coming to life. The third and final area of the three categories that I've mentioned is self-alignment. And this area is equally important as the other two. But self-alignment really relates to is your ability to self-assess, understanding you, understanding your strengths, your weaknesses, and how to integrate all of your team members in a similar process. So in other words, understanding how they may align best within that team or the framework of that department. Self-alignment is critical, and the ability to honestly self-assess is often problematic for leaders. They sometimes subconsciously don't pay enough attention to their strengths and weaknesses, or assume that because they have certain strengths or weaknesses, that the team should just adapt or adjust and make do with what they have coming from you, whether it's good or bad. And of course, we all do have these strengths and weaknesses. We have to try to improve in some of those areas where we may be a little bit weaker, but often it's a good idea to really focus on what are our true talents and being able to utilize that team to fill in those gaps. The other important part about self-alignment that I haven't really mentioned up to this point is the idea of being resilient or having resiliency. As a true leader, you need to be very resilient. Most positions within an organization that have some leadership responsibility is those positions that are first to hear the bad news. They also may be the first to hear good news, but they're often the ones that have to face the bad news, understand a change that may be coming down the road, and be able to incorporate the team into those changes in order to better meet expectations of that organization. Leaders have to be extremely resilient. They have to have the ability to bounce back quickly. We've covered so much in this short segment. Of course, there is still so much more that we could talk about or explore as it relates to leadership. A couple of areas that we spent a few minutes to talk about in this segment were the idea of leadership qualities. We explored a handful of words that relate to being a great leader. And of course, there are so many more that we didn't take the time to dig into or to investigate. We also talked about the idea of mission or purpose and how critical that is to drive towards that high performance leadership. And we talked about three categories or three areas of leadership that is important for every leader to be able to successfully lead teams. And they are the areas of integration, the area of working with others, and of course, last but certainly not least, the areas related to self-alignment. Today's leadership roles face many challenges, but the most successful leaders will be able to integrate and utilize many of the concepts that we've discussed in this short segment to become a high-performance leader. Thank you for watching today. I hope that this short segment has given you many new or refreshed thoughts as you consider your role as aspiring leader. Let's end with a closing quote. Failure doesn't last, and neither does success. Make your next move your best move.